Today, for this afternoon session is Professor Daniel Goh. He is a colleague of mine in the Department of Sociology. This is his day job. He has a after work job as an NMP in NCMP in the Parliament. His academic research is in historical sociology and sociology of religion. So today he's talking about urban Christianity in Malaysia and Indonesia, which is an ongoing research project. Okay, 10 minutes.
Okay. All right, good afternoon everyone. I'm glad to be here, and this is a very preliminary kind of findings from our research project, Urban Christianity in Malaysia and Indonesia. And this is from the SSRTG project that I'm working with Terence Chong from ISEAS with. And we have two RAs with us, Evelyn Tan and John Chu, and they are sitting actually at the back. Evelyn, John. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna leave after this session because I'm really busy. I really need to do some stuff. Although it's supposed to be after work, but it overlaps. I'm gonna leave. So if you have any questions, you can either email me or you can talk to the two RAs, right, Evelyn and John, all right, about this project. All right. Now the method that we're using is ethnography and interviews, and we've been visiting the different cities in Malaysia and Indonesia. We're moving on to the Philippines and then to Vietnam later on, and then we're going to revisit some of the other churches again in Malaysia and Indonesia. So we visited 3 cities: KL, Penang, Kuching, Jakarta and Surabaya. We are planning for Manila, Cebu, Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi. All right. So what have we found so far? Okay, preliminary findings. All right. We are looking at independent Pentecostal churches that are experiencing very strong growth in these cities. And what we found is that they've been using what I call, or what Terence and I would call, urban methods in pushing for the strong growth. Now the strong growth happens in the midst of being a minority ethnicity and religion, right, within the cities. Right, very often facing very contentious politics. Like for example, in Jakarta now you have all the riots and a lot of fake news flying around about Christians, about Chinese. So it's the kind of environment that they persist in and still experience strong growth. So what are the urban methods? They use camouflage, both social and physical and geographical. Right? They have a very strong sense of civic patriotism that they are not shy to display whenever they can. They plug into intercity networks of knowledge, and that's important for them to sustain themselves, all right, as a church of growth in which new teachings, new preachings, new materials, new content, new songs, new practices are being reintroduced and adapted and innovated. Singapore is often used as a hub, all right, for this interchange of knowledge. Okay, I'll speak a bit about that later on. Adaptation and innovation of practices, all right, in which there is a lot of, I don't want to use the word localization, but what it does is that it creates the kind of resonance and meanings, kind of meaningful kind of resonance with the local population, right? Sometimes it's city specific, all right. Overall, what it does is that it creates a much more intense and kind of persistent kind of city consciousness in which the Christianity that evolves out, right? It's not pegged to so-called Asian Christianity or Indonesian Christianity. I mean, the nationalism is there, but very often they invoke the city, all right, as both an object and also the subject, all right, of their Christian action. All right, camouflage. Now, so this is a building in Penang. It's an R&D building, so it's a hexagon. You can see the word hexagon there, and the church, the church signboard is actually below it. It's Excel Point. You won't recognize it if you walk past it. You think that Excel Point is just another company, right, within this R&D facility. It's at the top floor. The auditorium occupies the top floor, right? So it looks like an auditorium and so forth. So the kind of camouflage is important, all right? Especially because that particular town is mixed Malay and Chinese, and they do aim to evangelize, all right? They don't use the word, and they're very careful in using the word even within the auditorium in the church, because it's a very open space in which people can walk in without being stopped. Right? So they are very careful to introduce that. They have more closed door seminars that train people how to do outreach that's sensitive to race, ethnicity, and other religions and so forth. Right? So camouflage, an example. Civic patriotism, all right? This is one of the churches that we went to in Kuching, and once we entered, we saw the Malaysian flag with the statement or the mission statement, the vision of the church being imprinted on it, all right? So very obvious kind of patriotism being displayed, right? Intercity networks. This is a church in KL. I'm just going to be very fast and very synoptic because this is just kind of preliminary findings that I'm presenting to you. Intercity networks. This is the Calvary Convention Center in KL, and it's also camouflage in the sense that instead of building a church-like structure with the architecture of a church, they built a convention center so as to kind of fit into the notion of KL as a kind of hub for the region and so on and so forth, right? So they built a convention center, and they wanted the convention center to serve not only as a church, right, as the building for the church services, but also as a place in which Pentecostals in the region and around the world will flow through and enjoy the facilities, right, as guest speakers, but also to hold their services, hold their conferences, hold their seminars and workshops and whatnot. So in order, when they opened the center and to bless the center, they held the World Pentecostal Conference, right, at a stage in which important Pentecostal figures around the world, from the US, from Australia, from Europe, came to bless the church, the center. All right, Singapore as hub. I'm just presenting you two photographs. The one on the left is in Kuching. It's the Kuching Evangelical Church. It's a more conservative, non-Pentecostal church, but I chose it as to present to you as Singapore as hub because it is experiencing the pressure of Singapore as a hub, because it is the only church, or one of the few churches in Kuching left, that is evangelical and conservative and trying to hold up against Pentecostalism, whereas a lot of the other churches within its own synod or its own congregation, the Borneo Evangelical Mission, converting, all right, and moving towards Pentecostalism. And a lot of them was St. Joseph Prince, for example. So Singapore is a hub in which the kind of influence from Singapore is very obvious. So this church, which is one of the oldest evangelical churches in Kuching, is resisting that transformation, right, of independent churches and evangelical churches in Kuching. Right? The one at the bottom is from Surabaya. It's a church with the acronym MDC, and it's against camouflage. It's in a shopping center. It's an auditorium without any obvious kind of signs of Christianity. All right, and the other camouflage is in the name, because it wanted to name the church Making Disciples in Christ, right, MDC, but it had to change to Masa Depan Ceras, which means bright future in Bahasa, right, because they cannot make it too obvious that they are Western influence and so on and so forth, and it was during the Soeharto period, so they had to camouflage themselves. I'm putting it there because we had lunch with the pastor there, and he was talking about how he learned his cell group organization methods from FCBC in Singapore, from Lawrence Kong, and that when City Harvest he got into trouble with the law, he was one of the few people in Indonesia that offered support to Kong Hee by praying for him and calling him and wanting to visit him and so on and so forth. All right. Adaptation and innovation. All right. Some more slides. This is in Blessed Church, Blessed Chapel in Kuching, one of the largest church in Kuching. The population of 600,000. This church is 3,000. So it's kind of equivalent to a new creation in terms of percentage. Blessed Chapel, they had to take out their shoes. First time I had to take out my shoes, almost like in a Chinese temple or Hindu temple. All right, going in. And the reason for that is because they like to kneel down, and they found that kneeling, which is a very innovative practice in Pentecostal churches, because they don't kneel. Right, it's a Catholic thing, right? So they have taken to kneeling as a way to show their pietism. Right? So it's a very interesting innovation. And the realization for the pastor is that kneeling actually helps them to believe. And those of you who have read Althusser, for example, right? You believe and then you pray. It's actually you pray and then you believe. Right? It's the act of praying and kneeling actually brings you to the belief rather than the other way around. Right? So this is in some way an instance of that. And they use horns, traditional horns, right, for during their singing in tongues. And so it's an amalgamation of Christian beliefs, because the use of horns is the idea is to kind of bring down the walls of Jericho, right, which is a biblical reference, right, in which the city falls to the Jews because the horns were used going around the city walls with the horns, bring down the walls of Jericho and conquer Jericho for God. All right. And then the horns are, of course, traditional horns of Borneo. So there's a kind of a hybridization here. The other photo here is an interesting church in in Surabaya that is called Satu Jam, meaning it's a 1 hour church. The guarantee, the promise is that the services will not last more than 1 hour, right? So it's a very quick fire kind of service that you can go to, right? So it's again in a shopping mall and everything. So it's catered to consumerism and also camouflage. All right. Last slide. Just to show you the kind of city consciousness, and I like this church the most because it's very obvious in their very name, right? Kingdom City. All right, and they have 5 branches in Malaysia. All right, so they have Kingdom City Kuching, Kingdom City Penang, Kingdom City KL, Kingdom City Johor Bahru. There's a Kingdom City in Singapore too, and they're opening Kingdom City in Indonesian cities. All right, so they're expanding the region with the focus of being the very intercity networks themselves, and they would transmit live and the services at the same time, so that everyone can enjoy the service, and the pastor would rally each of the cities. It's very obvious in the video cast, the live video cast, that they will call Kingdom City KL, Kingdom City Penang, and so forth. And they don't have a base, and that's a very interesting thing, right? They don't have a base. They don't treat, although they opened the first one in KL, they don't treat KL as the mother church, right? So there's a kind of flat organization in which all cities are the same, and the pastors move around the churches between the cities, all right? And so it creates a kind of city consciousness, and in fact, the very first time I stepped into this church, I couldn't recognize it because, first of all, it looks like that, all right? And then secondly, the people who are pastors and everything, they're wearing leather jacket and jeans, looking like me now actually, wearing black too, right, with the Kingdom City logo here, and I thought they were more like a, I don't know, interesting gym, club or something like that. All right, and they tend to use a lot of technology. And in fact, when we entered into the service, I felt I was going to a rave concert. Right, everyone was just jumping up and down and singing, and there was no obvious signs of Christianity. The words were a bit generic, like love, 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 and stuff like that. But there's nothing very specific to, let's say, the biblical references and so on and so forth. All right, so it has in some ways it's a very interesting kind of innovation. All right. Okay. All right. So this is the end of my talk. Right. So questions and answers now.
Also, there is an aspect of a society of consumption, in a mall, and I don't know the faith in detail, but like consuming is a way of showing I'm successful. I mean, do you see this trend or not? Also part of it.
Well, because of the camouflage, they're not too obvious. Not like Singapore. So they try not to be too flashy in their consumption. So they'll be quiet about it. And they will downplay their ethnicity and their consumption as much as possible, especially in Indonesia. Yeah. And it's not only in shopping malls. I mean, shopping malls, I think, yes, it's linked to the consumption. So the Satu Jam, for example, in the 1 hour kind of service, it's very catered to consumerism. Right? So you come to the service 1 hour, and then after you can go shopping and go eat lunch, in the shopping mall. But there were also other churches in Surabaya, in KL, in which they buy shop houses. Shop houses like more traditional kind of urban setting in Southeast Asian cities, but they don't make it too obvious that it is a church. They keep it as a shop house setting without the symbols, without the cross sticking out, and so on and so forth. So it's not like Seoul, when you go there, you see the skyline, you see crosses across Seoul, right, in buildings. But here it's kind of they blend in as much as possible into the neighborhood.
Is it a reaction against possible Islamic
counteraction?
It's possibly that, but that's a more recent thing. Like, for example, the terrorist bombing that happened in Surabaya. That increased security. So for example, they won't allow cars to be parked near the place. They monitor every movement. They get security guards, increase security. But it was already happening in the previous era, like in the Suharto era. So it was really during the Suharto era that it was. I think it's also linked not just to the religious aspect, but also the ethnic aspect, because these are Chinese mainly who are converting, right? But they also do have locals, Burmese, who are converting, and because they are also converting and joining the Chinese in the services, they have to camouflage even further, right? Because it get too obvious if you see a kind of mixture of ethnicity in the church in which Chinese are leading the conversion of Buddhists. Yeah. So it's a more historical, more complex motivation to camouflage than the more recent wave of Islamism that's happening in Indonesia or even in KL. Now, even in Penang, for example, where it's Chinese majority, where you're freer in a sense to be able to express your Chineseness and your religion in Christianity because it's more long established, especially when you're in the Georgetown area. They still do the camouflage because they're very sensitive. They're very worried about creating tensions. I think feeding back into because Terence and I we started this whole thing doing work on Singapore independent churches. I think studying the churches in KL, in Surabaya, in Penang, actually gives us a kind of fresh perspective on what's happening also in Singapore, whether there is camouflage happening, whether there's adaptation and innovation that we missed out. We thought that it is imported practices, but actually it is not in Singapore. So I think the research has been quite productive in that sense.
Then what about the rock?
What about it? You like it?
I mean, isn't that a camouflage of?
Well, it is a camouflage.
Yeah. So, but in Singapore, we don't have the same kind of ethnic and racial pressure.
So that's very interesting. So the question there's a reason in my mind at least is why? Why is there a need for camouflage in Singapore, right? I think although we don't have that, the Chinese is the majority, Christians are in a privileged position.
Yeah.
But I think there is always that underlying fear that the government is monitoring you. When you grow too big, and if you cannot quite camouflage the networks of capitalism, this is what the rock is about, working with capital land and so on and so forth, you may get in trouble, right? Because the government doesn't like it to be too big. So here, I think there's a different motivation for camouflage, but it's kind of linked to because in Indonesia, the camouflage began to take place during the Suharto regime, right? So it's not because that they were just simply minority or simply because they're religion, because of an authoritarian state that's always looking at you as an organization not being too big and not threatening the status quo. And I think we have to trace it back to that motivation. And I think it's interesting that in Singapore, the camouflage might be motivated by that primarily.
Is there any patterning after the American evangelical church?
In what sense?
The mega churches, the rock concert.
No, actually, we're more. I think the churches in Asia, at least in these three countries, in Singapore, including Singapore, if anything is imported, I think we make it more American than America, more Australian than Australian.
Yeah.
Put it that way. So we take the so-called rock concert format and turn it into even more rock concert, right? So it's like Kingdom City, for example, is very much inspired by, I think, a lot of the Australian Pentecostal churches. And the pastor actually migrated to Perth and married an Australian, and then they moved back to KL. So in some ways, they themselves are migrants who have brought back to Malaysia those practices, but they made it even much more secular, if you want to put it that way. We still can't find the right words to connote the trend, but they make it much more intense, much more hyper, right, than what it is. And in some ways, we can think of it as being more westernized than the West, but I would like to think of it as adaptation and innovation, but we have to find, I think, the right conceptual tools to understand what exactly it is.
Go ahead.
Camouflage also in Singapore, could it be a little bit, to me when I think of a religious troublemaker in Singapore, I think of a Christian. That in other contexts, other country, people will right away think of a Muslim, but here it's really through the press and so on.
Would that be your French
perspective? Yeah.
Your traditional French
bias, so maybe.
Yeah. But I think you're right. I think because the Christians are much more activistic here in Singapore. I think that's the reason. They're much more vocal. And then, I mean, in recent years, he got into trouble with the law. And then you have Lawrence Kong, who wanted to challenge the state, constitutionally for the judicial review. So we do hear about them wanting to stand up against the state more. I think so. Therefore, we see them as the troublemakers in that sense. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.